Senator Cotton, please.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony today and your appearance. Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Smith, I want to ask, to what extent do your companies, or Mr. Schmidt in your case, maybe the company that you used to lead, or other companies that you may represent, rely on Chinese suppliers for electronic hardware, things like printed circuit boards, raw materials like rare earth elements? Mr. Schmidt, you want to take that first?
I'm no longer with Google.
Yes, I understand, but to the extent you still have knowledge of their operations.
Yeah, so in general, the reliance is on Taiwan. And I think that as a matter of national strategic priority, Taiwan becomes more important to the United States for that reason. And the reliance on Taiwan is quite serious. I'm not aware of mainland China dependencies, but there may be.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, I think what we see at Microsoft is pretty representative of what we're seeing across the IT sector for hardware production, which is a pretty seismic shift towards what I would call the diversification of the supply chain, which means, frankly, moving more suppliers out of China and to other countries. We're really focused on what I would describe as a multi-country, multi-continent strategy. And what you're seeing today is a lot of hardware manufacturing start to move to countries like Thailand and Vietnam and Singapore. You certainly see Taiwan, as Eric mentioned, as critical, South Korea, Mexico, and the United States itself. I think it's right to think of it in the following way. The supply chain in China was created over the course of about 20 years. And I think with the exception of semiconductor chips, where the fabrication costs are so high, we're probably working through a transition of what I'd call 5 years or so, where you're going to see us and everyone else have a much more diversified supply base.
Mr. Schmidt, you mentioned reliance on Taiwan in particular. Are you talking about reliance primarily on Taiwan for semiconductors?
Yes.
And that's a especially dangerous reliance because Beijing considers Taiwan to be part of the People's Republic of China, correct?
That's correct. And if I may add that there was a time when the United States was the great leader in semiconductors. And indeed, this Congress in the 1980s approved something called Semitech to make sure, it was headquartered in Austin and was pretty successful in the eyes of many people. But over the last 20 or 30 years, the majority of the production of powerful semiconductors offshore, with the exception of some of Intel's fabs and a few foundry fabs. But it's fair to say that if you want a leading piece of hardware, which is what we all need to do what we do, you're probably going to use a vendor called TSMC, which is the one in China. They're just faster, better, et cetera. One of the key recommendations that's in the AI report coming out on March 1st is that America needs to stay 2 semiconductor generations ahead of China, and that we need to do the steps necessary to do that, which are long and complicated and painful, but it's really important. We were in this business, we got out of business, we should get back into it.
Yeah, I just want to point out that our dependence on TSMC is great, and the vulnerability of them to China is great as well. Mr. Smith, you talked about South Korea or some other countries you might diversify into in Southeast Asia. Those countries are still, let's just say, within striking range of mainland China, but China doesn't have a core claim to want to forcibly seize their territory. And this is one reason why Taiwan is not just a strategic and a moral question for the American people, but also vital to make sure that we don't allow the Chinese Communist Party to seize control of the world's most important chip manufacturer. So I strongly support the efforts that we have to build more semiconductors here in the United States. That's why I worked with Senator Cornyn, Senator Schumer, Senator Warner last year on the American Founders Act, and we're trying to get money for it this year, but also to diversify out of striking range, let's say, from China, and in particular, out of Taiwan itself. We want to be good partners with TSMC, and we want to will always defend Taiwan's sovereignty and autonomy. But this is not a vulnerability that the American people can continue to permit.
If I could just add, there are quite a few research efforts in America leading to new designs and new approaches to semiconductor that would create the possibility of a leapfrog. Those need to be investigated. That's part of American greatness, and we need to emphasize them.
I agree, and TSMC is planning to open a plant in Arizona. That's great as well. We want to help that kind reshoring of manufacturing of semiconductors as well. My time has expired. Thanks, gentlemen, for showing up.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator